On today's show, the San Diego Padres have a lot of things going for them in 2025, but even still, the question does remain, and I've seen a lot of people ask it, is the championship window still open? Going to be talking about that, why it might not be open, why it might be closed, all that sort of stuff, as well as some news with our boy Don Orsillo and a roster move that might be a controversial one in the form of Yuli Gurriel. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Thursday, February 20th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly, as evidenced by me not knowing the date, not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Feel free to check me out on there. Send me any of your questions if you want to talk ball. We are getting closer to the season, so I'm even more down to talk baseball than usual. Because, during the offseason, I'm like, if you ask me anything about baseball, I'll, kill you. You know what I mean? I hate that. I hate it. I'm, of course, kidding, guys. Go check me out on there. Also, go check out my other baseball-related work over at Just Baseball, where not only do I write about the Padres and general baseball, also work on the newsletter. Subscribe to that for free to get all of your latest updates around baseball. All sorts of that. If you're a general baseball lad or gal, go check that out for sure. It is a lot of fun. And I'm also going to be relaunching my other podcast that's about more general, fun baseball topics there soon. So today's episode, guys, we're going to be talking Padres championship window. Is it closed? Is it open? It is something that I feel like has not only been asked, I've gotten a lot of questions about this, actually. And by a lot, I mean 5 or 6. But still, I've gotten throughout the offseason, the end of last season, this idea, is it closed? Is this still a team that can compete? Especially with the relatively meek offseason by their standards, an offseason that was, I still think, with the Nick Pivetta signing, that was still a pretty great move, but I still understand the concern with the team. So we're going to talk about all those concerns. We're just going to talk about them. Because, frankly, I think it might be closed, but I am really fluent on this. I'm like 51-49 on this kind of issue, I guess you could say. So we'll see. We're going to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about a couple news announcements. Let's start with the joyous news. That is that Don Orsillo has signed a long-term extension to continue to be the play-by-play announcer for the San Diego Padres, your San Diego Padres, for the foreseeable future. Really cool. The news was announced recently. He posted on Twitter about it. Really cool. He posted this really fun photo of what's that song? I forgot what that song's called. The Business. What is that song called? And he had that playing in the background too. That was really cool. Just really great. Yeah, by Tiesto. The Business. He posted it right outside Petco. Really cool stuff. Don is awesome. I've said for years, I just think, when it comes to even the bad seasons, he just keeps you into it. It's one of the most engaging broadcasts, along with Mark Grant, too, that I just think they're one of the best booths in baseball, and I don't think that that's too biased, because people who are fans of other teams who have booths that they really do are like, nah, man, Don and Mud are just fantastic. So really, really just pleasant news. I don't think this is much of a surprise, but I know how baseball can be sometimes. I mean, this is a guy who you'd be wondering, how'd the Padres even get him in the first place? Well, the Red Sox let him go for whatever reason, right? So it still can happen, but long-term extension with the Padres, really, really cool. And again, on those days, on those weeks when you're just putting on the game and you just want to hear someone, who's so excited. The Padres could start off the season 20-26, and he still has the same level of enthusiasm. He always brings it. And he's just a stand-up guy. He kicks butt. He's active on Twitter, too. I see that he'll like tweets every now and then. You know what I mean? So he's just super fun, and I love that. Even when the team isn't doing so great, he just is still there. You can always count on that. Like the old announcer for the Seattle Mariners when they weren't good back in the day. R.I.P. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was excellent, too. And he always brought it, and he was one of the reasons that Mariners fans even tuned in the first place. So this stuff is great. Love to see that. But the other news, Yuli Gurriel signed by the Padres kind of out of nowhere at the age of 40. First, let's just talk about him as a player. This is a guy who has been a batting on base dude for a long time. He's been a guy who's been productive at times. He actually put up a 4-win season once in 2019. He's always been a decent walk guy. And last year with the Royals, he wasn't a great fielder and all of that stuff, but 83 WRC plus, 241, 338, 296 slash line. His expected weight on base was a little bit higher than his weight on base, 316 versus 289. That was nice. Did not hit any home runs. He's never really been that much of a power guy, with the exception of that one 2019 season. So as a player, it's just kind of whatever. You're adding a veteran bat. Maybe they see something here. I personally don't. I just don't get the signing from that perspective. But I think more importantly, it's not from the player perspective. It is from the off the field perspective, right? For those who don't know, back in the 2017, I think, World Series, when the Astros played the Dodgers, Yuli Gurriel infamously, and you guys can go look up the details if you want, made a racist gesture after teeing off on Yu Darvish in the World Series. And don't get me wrong, Darvish, very famous for not doing well in that World Series. And by all accounts, like, that really stuck with him. Like, the fact that he was just dreadful when his team needed him most. And while I have been annoyed at sometimes the slander he gets for that, bias incoming, everybody be careful, bias incoming, that I've seen from Dodgers fans where they like make mocking this guy. I think it's a little bit more tongue-in-cheek than actually like real we hate this guy. But still, for the most part, I'm always like, come on, man, leave the guy alone. He ain't the only one that didn't show up in the postseason, so or has ever not shown up in the postseason. Look at Aaron Judge last year, God. So I think that has been a little bit unfair. But forget that for a second. More importantly was the gesture. It was completely ridiculous, completely awful in the moment. And a lot of people are wondering, why are you bringing Yuli Gurriel to a team that has Yu Darvish on it? And I have a lot of thoughts on this. The first thought is that I don't understand why you would risk something like this for a player that has not been productive in a long time. And frankly, you could argue has never been super productive. This isn't even a player who is a Hall of Fame player who's just at the end of his rope, like, say, Robinson Cano, when the team brought him on, where you could say, all right, you know what, they're doing some chemistry thing. They like him in the clubhouse. He is beloved amongst a lot of players, so that's fine, right? And it didn't turn out fine because he wasn't very good. Yeah, remember when Robinson Cano was a Padre? That was a funny time. So all in all, just, I don't get it from that perspective. And then number two, obviously, what kind of message does this send? Now, according to multiple reports from the Tribune, from AC, from Sanders, like we've seen, they said that Preller, the Padres management, they did tell Yu Darvish about this weeks prior to it happening. Now, here's the thing. Well, that might be an easy point for people like us who are not at the center of this hateful exchange between the two. It's also true that, have y'all ever been around people that they ask, hey, is this okay? But you still feel inclined to say yes because you want to be a nice guy. You don't want to impede things too much. You don't want to be a problem, which is a tag that sometimes gets thrown on people. And not to, I hate doing this, but like, you know, as a person of color myself, there have been situations where it's like, yeah, it's fine, I guess, but I don't want to look like the bad guy because people will immediately be like, oh, there they go. You know, there he goes. Javi's being ridiculous again. You know what I mean? So that can be frustrating. So I don't want to assume anything with this, but it's also true that Yu Darvish himself, after the incident occurred, Yuli Gurriel was very apologetic. And he, by the way, should have been, obviously. I'm not giving him credit for that. Like you absolutely should be. And Yu Darvish did kind of have a response back then when it happened, which is like, hey, people learn and grow. I'm paraphrasing, of course, and I'm just glad to see, you know, you don't do that, right? And it's been a long time, right? Like it has been a long time since then. So this is one of those things where I can't really give you an opinion on how this will affect the clubhouse. I can't. My issue is, why bring the factor in, right? Wouldn't you rather just go out and sign, I don't know, what kind of free agents that we got out there, man? Like there's plenty of other veterans without this type of baggage, and particularly without the type of baggage that is related to a player of yours, right? Like you couldn't just go and sign Anthony Rizzo, G-Man Choi, I wouldn't mind, Rowdy Tellez, right? I know that they, you know, Padres got like Gavin Sheets, for example, but I just feel like you couldn't do anything else, right? Yuli Gurriel, really? You could go get my Matt Duffy. He's unproblematic. We don't have a problem with him. I'm just saying that that's kind of what I see. Now, then again, hey, Preller's been doing really good for a long time now, and I understand that people trust him. But for me, I just feel like this brings an unstable element to the situation. We'll see how it pans out. I hope. Now, the good news is, objectively speaking, even if I don't know if he was doing, like I mentioned before, you just don't want to be a problem, they did reach out to him weeks before. This was not a surprise for Yu Darvish. So hopefully it goes well. Hopefully it's not water under the bridge. I don't want to say water under the bridge, but hopefully things have been squashed. Things have changed. We have seen in sports really bad, awful bigoted moments, and players come a little bit together afterwards. I remember Kenyon Martin had a thing with Jeremy Lin in the NBA, who followed that a while ago, right? And they came together and they're cool now, right? Or as cool as you can be. And frankly, it's also true that some players don't get along and sometimes the team works. So I don't know what I'm saying. You guys probably can sift through the madness of my ramblings and get what I'm trying to get at. But overall, we'll see. The Padres have also, last bit of news, been linked to Jose Quintana among 3 other teams. Interesting. That would be really wild. Jose Quintana was not very great last year, but he is a quality veteran who has been at least a guy who, again, can throw innings, gives you a lot more assurance. But I'm not like dying on that one because I don't mind if the Padres are like Morejon, Kolek, Vasquez, especially Vasquez lately. I feel like I've been hearing a little bit of juice on him and buzz. Waldron. I'm okay with you trying to use in-house options for the last spot. For 2 spots, that's different. But again, we'll keep an eye on that. Could be the last big signing the Padres make this off season. But folks, let me tell you. You know what's something that is empirically fantastic and has no baggage to it, except for literally being a bag? It is our good friends over at Wonderful Pistachios. Folks, we love them, and here's my bag because they are so good. I have them with me at nearly all times throughout the day whenever I am in the mood for a little snack. And the thing about Wonderful Pistachios, guys, is that it's both delicious and nutritious. Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. It's one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you, unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love all of them. You know what I mean? I don't mind getting the no-shell variety. It's easier. Sometimes I like the satisfaction of cracking them open. Whatever it is, they've got a bunch of different flavors, a bunch of different varieties for you, and the bags are just stacked. I mean, this thing's going to last me like a month. Let me tell you guys, like I love these things. And as someone who is trying to lose weight, someone who's trying to curb their appetite a little bit, it's really satisfying in that respect, I should say, guys. So get snackin and hold up, let me do this. Crackin. It's horrible for my audio listeners. And go check out the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, thriving and vibing into segment number 2, where we try to get into the main topic of the show, which is the question of, is the Padres championship window closed, folks? And I think that there's a bunch of opinions on this. Again, I talked about this at the top of the show. Like, I really have gotten a lot of words on this, and I think that it's important to note that this starts to go away after months and months, and when you're getting into the season. Look, we're all hypocritical. It's so over, we're so back. Oh no, it's totally over. Oh, we're totally back. We flip-flop a lot as sports fans and as fans of a particular team. That is something that happens constantly, right? My friend literally, and I have the text, said, better luck next year for 2026 for the Eagles, right? And that was back in, I think it was September 17th that he texted me that, and I still have the text. Shout out to you, Mike, if you're listening. But I do understand the vibe around this, right? So let's begin into it. In general, the vibe of how good the Padres were last year and still losing in the NLDS, I understand how crippling that can be, right? And that's one of my reasons, is that this was the best team with runners on base in high leverage situations all year. And they had a pretty deep lineup. I understand that you could have asked for more from some players, like Luis Arraez being an example, and I understand he was hurt. But in general, you got so much out of players you weren't expecting to. Right? That's how deep this lineup was. And I think that is the big thing. Signing guys like Scott and Hassan Kim. No, wait, I'm blanking. Sorry. Signing guys like Jurickson Profar, Kyle Higashioka, and Donovan Solano, and all of those players being good. And I don't just mean being like, oh, they're better than expectations. Everybody knows the Padres, Jurickson Profar just got paid by the Braves with how good he did last year. But in general, you just had a lineup with a lot of above-average offensive players. Even David Peralta had a 115 WRC plus for the Padres last year. Jurickson Profar, 139. He was great. We all know about that one, right? And then you had Kyle Higashioka, 105 WRC plus. What more can you ask for an emergency backup catcher because Luis Campusano was so dreadful? Donovan Solano, 118 WRC plus. Those things add up and make you a very good team, on top of the fact that you had Jackson Merrill at the 130, Tatis at 135, right? You had Manny Machado doing a lot better, especially as the season went on, right? For you to get all of that and still lose in the NLDS to a team that was a little bit shorthanded in terms of not their lineup is still great. Teoscar Hernandez is awesome. Mookie Betts is awesome. Freddie Freeman is awesome. I know Mookie had been struggling, don't get me wrong, but that wasn't going to keep up for long. For them to have as deep of a lineup that they had, you had to show up offensively, and they just didn't. Obviously, 24 innings scoreless. And on top of that, they also had just production from Tatis on a superstar level in the playoffs, and you were like, this guy's going to carry us, and you were up 2-1, right? So you consider all of that, and there is a feeling of, well, all they did this offseason was they brought back Teoscar Hernandez, they brought in Michael Conforto, who's going to hit 30 home runs, by the way. They brought in Blake Snell. They have Roki Sasaki. They brought in probably some other player that I'm blanking on right now. For them to do all the adding that they did, get healthier than they did, hopefully for their sake, right? Like, hopefully if they stay healthy, I understand the pessimistic attitude. I get it. And then for the Padres to have the losses that they've had with Tanner Scott, with Ha-Seong Kim, with Jurickson Profar, and for the big additions to be in the lineup at least, which is a big deal, especially when left field without Profar is just a complete, question mark. When you're signing guys like Jason Hayward and Connor Joe, it does make you lose faith, right? So I understand that. And in general, again, they were so good last year and they still lost. They did have a little bit of a, this is our year vibe to them, right? I get that. I totally understand that. I would counter that by saying, that was not the vibe, especially amongst you fans heading into the year. I was very optimistic about the Padres last year. I really was. I thought their bullpen was going to be great. I thought that Michael King was an awesome piece to get. And then especially after they got Dylan Cease, and especially because they were so dreadful in the clutch in 23, that it would reverse around, right? I get that. But also, that's not the only reason, right, for why people think that the team's upside may be gone. We've talked about it. Joe Musgrove's Tommy John surgery. If you have Musgrove in this rotation right now, especially with Nick Pivetta being signed, I mean, that's one of the better rotations in the NL, right? Not a super duper star rotation necessarily like the Dodgers or even maybe like the Phillies, but there's good depth there and there's good upside there. And then you have a lot more leeway with some of your younger guys, some of your in-house options where you're like, hey, guess what? Matt Waldron, if someone gets hurt, knock, knock, you could come in and just be good for 1 or 2 starts as they recover, right? There's a lot less pressure on the rotation, I think, right? But of course, Joe Musgrove does get the Tommy John surgery, which did feel like it was a bad omen, by the way. Like, that was something that happened in the middle of the playoffs. And it was just like, maybe we should have looked at that more. Maybe that was, the skin of the ball getting ripped off in Sandlot. Like, maybe that was the omen part of the Padres playoff season that you were like, this can't be good. You know what I mean? This is not going to be good. I understand there's been other teams that have suffered injuries in the middle of the playoffs and done very well or even, won it all. Like, I remember totally different sport and circumstances, but Kevin Ware, if everybody remembers the Louisville Cardinals, like, he had one of the most gruesome injuries ever, and then they went all the way to the championship. But even still, the difference here is that Joe Musgrove is like a fixture of this team, one of the leaders of this team, and one of the better pitchers in the NL that you lost here, even if he didn't have the, let's say, the Cy Young upside of some other guys, and not just the division, but all of baseball. I understand that, but it adds to the fear, I think, with the Padres. And then you have, obviously, you lost while you were up. I already mentioned that, especially against LA. That's just such a dagger to the heart, right? And when you look at some other teams around sports, I remember the Detroit Lions, right? They lost when they were really good and they were up on San Francisco. Now, part of that was because Devil Magic was on the San Francisco 49ers side. I understand that. And then with the Padres, there was no Devil Magic. At least as far as I'm concerned, I didn't feel like something randomly lucky happened, is what I describe as Devil Magic. Now, we did have the Dave Roberts situation. I get that. But moving on from that, I think that there was a vibe of like, it was all in your hands. And when they lost that game 4 and they just got completely blanked by the Dodgers bullpen, Cease was very bad. He couldn't pitch on short-term rest. It was just like, what are you guys doing? And that's why I predicted on the podcast that they were going to lose game 5. You have that. You take that into account. And then you take into account some other things around the team. Some other more let's say, structural things with the team, right? Let's say the roster building with the team. And you realize history doesn't show a lot of times when this works out great, I guess to say, where you're a post-hype sleeper. People will bring up Stockton and Malone, right? NBA. Those guys didn't get into the finals until much later in their career. They kept the core together, and they eventually made the finals, and they didn't win, which is why that comparison is also not great, but stick with me, folks. You have that situation. You just have throughout, it's just in sports history, in my opinion, it's very rare that you come across a situation where the team is so down. The team is less than it was before. The momentum isn't nearly there as much as it was before. On top of some of the bad issues you already have with the team, with the Joe Musgrove Tommy John surgery, with losing some of your best players in Hassan Kim and Jerickson Profar, and Donovan. You didn't lose them to other teams, but what's his face? I'm blanking on one of them. David Peralta, right? Like, I understand the fear and I understand the frustration, and then structurally, obviously, we've talked about this a ton on this show, but with the ownership dispute, you're really wondering about that. You're saying, what the heck, man? How can we possibly have this situation where we're being shortchanged? We don't have as much money to spend on players. We can't do much in an offseason after you were so close. And in my opinion, in that moment, I do really believe, and I think Dodgers fans actually would agree, shout out my guy Jeff Snyder, that the Padres were, in that moment, in the postseason, the better team. They had better pitching, and their bullpen was good, if not just as good, or potentially even better than the Dodgers. They just had a lot on their side, especially after they won that Game 3 in demonstrative fashion, that you're going back to Petco, and then the rest is, or Game 2 in demonstrative fashion, then you go back, you win Game 3, and you have the chance to win the series, right? I just think that they were the better team, and then for you to go 24 scoreless innings, it's like, how do you come back from that? How do you come back from the 28-3 loss that the Atlanta Falcons have? Guess what? Spoiler, they didn't. And then with the ownership dispute on top of that, and the TV deal falling apart, which is something that we shouldn't forget either, this all coalesces into this feeling that the Padres could still be a very good team, right? They could still be a very good team. And I'm still hopeful, although I have no idea which way to feel on how ownership with John Sider, with the lawsuit with Shield, how this is going to change things going forward. I'm hopeful that at least this version of Padres baseball, and what I mean by this version is a team that will try. All I'm asking for, I don't want them going back to Seattle Mariners territory. I don't want them going back and acting like the Cleveland Guardians, because if that happens, that's a problem. But in terms of just the now window, I get why people are freaking out. And there's more reasons to, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, guys. But first, I need to take a second to talk to you about one of our longtime sponsors, and that is our friends over at FanDuel, ladies and gentlemen. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Really great stuff, guys. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your first shot. Your first shot, guys, at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And just like that, everybody, we're zooming into the final segment of this podcast, continuing my notes on the vibe and the feeling that the Padres championship window might be closed. There are other things, more isolated reasons, why people think this. Another reason, the Xander Bogaerts deal. And all those deals, frankly, prior to 2023. Did that end the potential room, let's say, the potential flexibility to be able to adjust to what has happened lately? Jake Cronenworth extension, the Xander Bogaerts deal. Frankly, the Manny Machado deal, I know it's not bad, though. Don't get me wrong. And Manny has also said, by the way, he's spoken out and said, I feel great. Like, I feel like I've really gotten over all the injury troubles that plagued me a bit in 23, and then especially in 24 at the beginning, that I feel like I've kind of, gotten past that a whole bunch, which is great, which is absolutely great to hear. But you have that all into account, and you're saying, man, you don't see a world in which the Padres can, really turn this around, right? And speaking of really turning it around, one of the things that can happen when you're in a bad spot with some of your star players, maybe underperforming in the case of Xander Bogaerts, who, again, it looks bad. It looks really bad. I am starting to get hopeful, though, right? We'll finish with that in a second. But with the Xander Bogaerts deal being for, 11-year deal, and I still think that there is, so what is that? He's played 2 seasons with the Padres, so you've still got 9 years left of that deal, which is, again, very startling, to say the least. You have all of that stuff. Then you take into account the farm system. One thing that really helps a team when they're like, star players aren't working really well, maybe our money isn't working well. What happens is if you have some depth in your farm system, you're really able to overcome that sometimes. And they don't have that right now, particularly from the pitching side. This is a team that has Dylan Cease, Michael King, Yu Darvish, Nick Pivetta as a starting 4. That's as good a starting 4 as you can find, or not as good as a starting 4 as you can find, but that's an electric starting 4. I think Michael King, it wouldn't surprise me if Michael King goes out and wins a damn Cy Young this year. Like, I really wouldn't be that surprised. I really wouldn't. I know that sounds biased and crazy Padres fan of me, but I really wouldn't. I think that guy's stuff is awesome. So I could see that. But when you have them entering as free agents, you're like, man, I'd like to have some flexibility to be like, we still have some options. So that way we don't have to trade these guys forcibly at the deadline. That way we don't have to further constrict our financial flexibility by extending these guys to extensions, or maybe we can only extend one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because you got rid of your pitching prospects, and Dylan Lesko and Robbie Snelling, they're gone. Like, those guys are gone. And that's a big problem, right? Because they gave them up in the Jason Adams and Tanner Scott deals. And guess what? Both of those guys were electric. The trades worked in the sense of doing what they wanted. And what they wanted was to be competitive and go for it last year. But now you lost some of your pitching prospects. You know what I mean? You lost them. And I'm not saying that Dylan Lesko and Robbie Snelling are the next Paul Skeens that we just gave up. We don't really know, I think. And especially in the case of Lesko, it's still a little bit unknown there. Maybe Preller sold high. We don't know. And speaking of Preller, I know he's usually able to regenerate, as he always does. But that's down the line. You know what I mean? We're talking about a championship window, not something of, can the Padres ever be good again, right? With AJ Preller at the helm. Clearly, this guy has been a master at regenerating the farm system. But for now, you're like, that's really down the line, man. You know what I mean? And you don't want to keep counting on a guy that will just keep finding prospects. I mean, I'd count on him more than most, but it's still a dicey situation. And Salas and DeVries, who are their 2 top prospects, in my opinion, are ways off. Ways off. Could that be next year? Sure. I think that DeVries could be next year. Salas, I think that's a 2, maybe even 3-year type of prospect, which is why don't be shocked if Ethan Salas gets shipped off if the right deal comes along and if the Padres are very competitive this year. I would not be surprised by that. But it's also just foolish in general with these 2 to assume that everyone's going to be a jackpot like Jackson Merrill. Could they be good players? Of course. But are they going to be players that can save you if all these aforementioned things keep going wrong? I don't know. You cannot assume that they're Jackson Merrill. Jackson Merrill was the jackpot. Very rare that players come up and are just as good as him so quickly, right? So that brings us again to the championship window question, and that's why people are nervous. Again, I have some hope. Don't get me wrong, but still. And then, there are deals that go up. Manny Machado, he's making $17 million this year, then he makes $25 million the next, and then $39 million the rest of the way. That's going to constrict your spending. It's going to make it a little bit harder to move around. So I understand. These are all of the reasons why people are really nervous, myself included, and why I think the championship window, not being a competitive team, and hey, crazier things have happened, not just being a competitive team, just championship team, because you've still got Atlanta, you've got the Dodgers, which are a big part of the cynicism around the Padres right now, where it's like, how can we compete when we're in apparently the only division in baseball that tries, right, with the Dodgers, with the D-backs, with even the Giants to an extent? How can you possibly compete? How are you going to set yourself apart from the rest of the pack? I get that, right? All of these things are totally fine, which is why, yes, I am heading into this baseball season thinking this could be a competitive team, could be a very good team, maybe even makes the playoffs, right? I could totally see that. But I'm not looking at this as, wow, they've got it. But then again, there's been other examples of teams that you're like, they don't have it anymore, and they end up winning, right? I remember when people were out on the Rangers. All right, hey, I saw it. I remember it. I remember when people were like, they spent too much, and they won a World Series. But the best comparison, and I know this is peak Cope, right? And they get brought up, frankly, way too much. But the 2019 Washington Nationals are always and forever a blueprint. I think people often focus when bringing up the Washington Nationals comparison on their record and how they ended up winning a World Series. That's not what I want to focus on right now. What I want to use them for when it comes to this comparison is the fact that they were a post-hype team. I understand that they ended up having Juan Soto, which, maybe some parallels, right? Like this, maybe some parallels with Jack Sobrero. I understand that. But in general, that was a team that was tremendously past their usual post-hype. That was a team that everybody was like, this is the least talented of their teams, right? They lost Bryce Harper famously, right? Like that's the biggest one. And Juan Soto, he comes in and is immediately a great replacement of that. And he finished, by the way, Rookie of the Year 2. And then he came in the next year and was awesome again. And then he was the big kind of building block player along with some players like Anthony Rendon, who maybe we compare that to Fernando Tatis Jr., right? And he had an amazing season. 44 doubles that year for Rendon and 34 bombs. And we all know what Soto was capable of. Like, maybe there's some parallels here. I feel like that team was a little bit past that point of everybody being really, really excited about them. Right? That's just me. Strasburg, everybody's really weirding out about him. Patrick Corbin, people were getting a little bit weird about. So that's what I want to focus on. Not that the fact that they started off poorly and won the World Series, but the fact that heading into that season, people were like, this is not, we've been talking about the Nationals for too long. I remember when they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated, right? With all that crazy talent they had with the Ryan Zimmerman days and all of that stuff. And they end up winning when they're arguably in their least talented form that year. That's my thing. And back then, Dodgers were, although not as much as now, still viewed as a juggernaut and the team to beat, and the Nationals won. So I know it's lazy. I know it gets overdone, but that is the comp to keep your hope on, right? Rookie, hey, you like that, right? Juan Soto finished second, so did Jack Sobrero. Maybe they take the next step this year. We'll have to see. But overall, and I'm not saying that Jack Sobrero is Juan Soto in terms of the overall skills. I think Soto's once in a generation. But in terms of being that guy who could really help when you've lost some other players and you've still got a pretty good rotation, crazier things have happened, guys. Crazier things have happened. Could you see Michael King be a Cy Young quality guy? Could he be just as good as Max Scherzer was that year? 2.92 ERA. What did he have? 243 strikeouts. Maybe not that good, but he can be that tier of pitcher. Could I see Dylan Cease doing Patrick Corbin with a 3.25? Not impossible. He's had it before. And can I see Yu Darvish quality the same way they got that out of Anibal Sanchez, who put together a 3.85 across 166 innings? I could see it, and they certainly have the talent to do it. So I'm 51-49 on this issue. I do think, if I gun to my head, that the Padres championship window is closed. But there's kind of a first time for everything, guys. And I really do think that the team is still being led, most importantly, another comparison to that Nationals team, to a team that tries. That's the key here. Teams that haven't been there and we're wondering about the championship window, they don't try. I got Jerry DiPoto talking about we've spent more money than ever. It's like, no, you haven't. Your payroll's like 130, and it was 159 just a few years ago. And then you guys have scaled back. The Padres are not like that. The Padres are still trying. And I think that, if anything, counts for the most. So we'll see. And then lastly, I'm starting to get a little bit of hope for Xander Bogaerts. Don't ask me why. We'll talk about that on a future episode when I dive a little bit deeper into the numbers and my thoughts. But is he really just going to be a guy that hits 240 and gets on a base at a 300 clip? Like, is that it? Because that would be way too soon for that to happen. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of hoping. He's lost some weight. He's been so bad that it can't possibly get worse, is my reasoning as of right now before we break him down. But we'll see, guys. Hopefully this was a somewhat optimistic episode. My apologies for the delayed upload. I had something to attend to recently, so we will get back to slightly earlier than 4 o'clock for people who are about to see this episode, guys. In tomorrow's episode, we're going to be having some fun. Speaking of hope, we're just going to be talking about my favorite moments of the last 5 years, basically hosting this podcast covering your San Diego Padres. It's going to be a lot of fun, going to be super nostalgic, just going to be a kickback, put a marshmallow over the pit, have some hot chocolate, especially if you're on the East Coast and it's really cold like where I am right now, and just relax and vibe and get nostalgic. We're going to call it the Fun Nostalgic Friday pod, guys. So look forward to that tomorrow. And of course, spring training, all that stuff is kicking off. So we're going to give you the latest breaking news on this show. Maybe if they sign Jose Quintana, maybe if they bring in another player, whatever it is. Look forward to that, guys. Baseball will be here before you know it. And with that being said, Until next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful, my Friar Faithful homies. Take care.